I gave everything to people who gave me nothing. I kept hoping they'd change someday, but they never did. So I finally changed instead. It's funny, isn't it? How you can spend years, decades even, living a life that feels entirely your own, built on foundations you believe are solid, only for one person, or a series of people, in my case, to come along and just shatter it all. Not with a bang, usually. More like a slow, insidious erosion. I used to be the kind of person who'd give you the shirt off my back and then apologize if it wasn't clean enough. That's not a humble brag, believe me. It's a confession. A confession of a blindness so profound it almost cost me everything. My name is Alex. And I lived in Greenwood, a town so picturesque it felt like a postcard someone had forgotten to mail. Old brick buildings, oak-lined streets, the smell of freshly baked bread from Miller's Bakery every Tuesday and Friday morning, mingling with the exhaust from Mr. Henderson's ancient Ford pickup. My days were a comfortable rhythm. Up at 6, coffee at the Willow Creek Diner. Black, 2 sugars, always. A quick chat with old Martha who'd run the place since before I was born, then off to the municipal library where I worked. I loved that library. The hushed reverence of the stacks, the faint scent of aging paper and floor wax, the quiet joy of connecting someone with just the right book. It was a simple life, yes, but it was mine, and I thought it was good. My parents, God rest their souls, were good people. Kind, perhaps too kind. They instilled in me this unwavering belief in humanity, this idea that if you just kept being good, kept being helpful, kept believing, then eventually, goodness would find its way back to you. They taught me to see the best in everyone, even when the evidence pointed vehemently in the opposite direction. And I, being their dutiful daughter, absorbed that lesson deep into my bones. It became my operating system, my default setting. If someone needed help, I helped. If someone needed a loan, I loaned. If someone needed an ear, I listened. I prided myself on being reliable, on being the person people could count on. My closest friend, Sarah, a whirlwind of vibrant red hair and sardonic wit, used to tease me about it. Alex, she'd say, stirring her iced tea with a clinking spoon at our usual booth in the diner, you've got to learn to say no. You're going to run yourself ragged catering to everyone else's dramas. I'd just smile and brush it off, thinking she didn't understand the quiet satisfaction I got from being there for people. What I didn't realize, what I couldn't realize then, was that I was cultivating a magnet for people who saw that generosity not as a virtue to be cherished, but as a resource to be exploited. For years, it was small things. My cousin David, for instance. A charming rogue with a knack for landing on his feet, usually by landing on mine. He always had a business idea, always needed seed money for some venture that promised millions and delivered exactly 0. He'd show up at my doorstep with his characteristic lopsided grin, the faint smell of stale cigarettes and desperation clinging to his worn denim jacket. Alex, my favorite cousin. Listen, I've got a golden opportunity, but I'm a little short this month. And I'd always open my purse. My parents had always helped him, so why shouldn't I? He was family, after all. He'd promised to pay me back, of course, with interest, with returns from his guaranteed success. The money never materialized. The promises, however, were delivered with such conviction, such earnestness, that I found myself believing them every single time. It was exhausting sometimes, but I told myself that's what family did. We supported each other. My greatest dream, outside of my quiet library life, was to open a small community center in Greenwood. A place for art classes, tutoring, maybe even a little theater group. I'd been saving diligently, putting away a significant portion of my librarian salary, watching the numbers slowly climb in my savings account. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the tangible future, a beacon of purpose. That dream, that center, felt like an extension of my belief in people, a place where everyone could find a little bit of goodness. I imagined the laughter, the learning, the connections. It was a beautiful picture, and I held onto it with both hands. It turns out, some people don't see beauty, they only see opportunity. And my dream, innocent and pure, was about to become their feeding ground. David was just the prologue. A small-scale warm-up act for the main event, the person who would truly make me question everything I thought I knew about trust, about love, about myself. And here's the thing about people like that, they don't walk in with flashing neon signs announcing their intentions. They slide in, subtle as a shadow, finding the cracks in your defenses, the soft spots where your empathy lives. You won't see them coming, not when you're busy polishing your rose-tinted glasses. And oh, how polished mine were. That's why I missed all the warning signs, the faint whispers that something was profoundly, terrifyingly wrong, signs that would eventually scream in my face. The first time I met Mark, it wasn't at the library. It was at the annual Greenwood Harvest Festival, under a sky bursting with early autumn colors. He was helping out at his uncle's booth, selling homemade jams. He had this easy smile, a kind of crinkling around his eyes that made him seem perpetually amused. And his laugh? It was a warm, rumbling sound that made you want to laugh along. He was new to town, having just moved back to help his ailing aunt and uncle. Or so he said. He had a way of looking at me, directly, intently, that made me feel seen. Not just a librarian or Alex, the kind one, but me. It was intoxicating. We talked for hours, leaning against the wooden counter, the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke swirling around us. He seemed genuinely interested in my library work, my dream of the community center. He even offered to help me research grants. I've got a background in project management, Alex, he'd said, his voice low and confident. I'd love to help bring your vision to life. Psychological deep dive number 1. Love bombing. What I didn't recognize then, what I only understood much, much later, was a phenomenon called love bombing. It's a manipulative tactic, often used by narcissists or people with similar destructive personality traits, where they overwhelm you with attention, affection, compliments, and grand gestures very early in a relationship. It creates an intense, almost dizzying bond. They mirror your interests, make you feel like you've found your soulmate, the one person who truly gets you. It's designed to disarm you, to bypass your usual defenses, and to create a dependency. It makes you drop your guard so completely that when the red flags do start to appear, you're already so invested, so emotionally entangled, that you're much less likely to see them for what they are. You're under a spell, high on their validation. And I, dear reader, was absolutely under Mark's spell. Our relationship progressed at lightning speed. Dinners at the Willow Creek, long walks by Miller's Pond, spontaneous weekend trips to the coast. He was charming, attentive, passionate. He spoke of our future within weeks, not months. And then came the first subtle tremor, a hairline crack in the perfect facade. It was a Tuesday evening, about 3 months in. We were at my place, cooking pasta, when his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, then quickly flipped it face down on the counter. Just a work call, he mumbled, a little too quickly. I'll deal with it later. Oh, okay, I said, stirring the sauce. A few minutes later, it rang again. Same reaction. Third time, a text message popped up on the screen, visible for a split second before he snatched the phone and excused himself to the bathroom. He was in there for a good 15 minutes, his voice a low murmur I couldn't quite discern. When he came back, he was jovial, perhaps overly so. Everything all right? I asked, a tiny knot forming in my stomach. Perfect, babe. Just a client being a pain. You know how it is. He kissed my forehead, changed the subject, and suddenly the knot eased. It's just work, I told myself. Everyone has annoying clients. Then there was the money. He had mentioned his project management background. One evening, he told me about a fantastic opportunity, a chance to invest in a new local startup, a sustainable farm initiative. It's a no-brainer, Alex, he'd insisted, leaning forward across my kitchen table, his eyes shining with conviction. High returns, low risk. And it's for a good cause, something you'd really believe in. He needed a small loan, just to cover some initial costs, about $500. I'll pay you back next week, promise. My bonus comes in. I hesitated, just for a moment. My community center savings. But he was so enthusiastic, so earnest. And it was for a good cause. I went to the ATM the next day. The money, like David's loans, never materialized back in my account. When I gently reminded him weeks later, he looked genuinely distressed. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Things got a bit tight with the farm. You know how these startups are. It's coming, though. Definitely by next month. He hugged me tight and the conversation ended. The excuses started to pile up like old newspapers. His car broke down constantly, needing expensive repairs that always seemed to coincide with payday. His phone bill was astronomical, lost wallet, emergency dental work. Each time, he'd present the problem with such a convincing narrative, such a look of genuine regret, that my empathy would kick in, overriding the growing voice of skepticism. Sarah, my ever-observant friend, was getting worried. Alex, are you sure about this guy? She asked one afternoon, her brow furrowed. He just seems too perfect. And you're always covering his bills. I got defensive, which, in hindsight, was another massive red flag about my own state of mind. He's just going through a tough patch, Sarah. He's doing so much for his family. One evening, he was late for dinner, 3 hours late. No call, no text. My stomach was in knots. When he finally arrived, looking disheveled, he had a story about getting into a minor fender bender, helping the other driver who was injured, getting caught up with police reports. My phone died, honey. I'm so sorry. I know you were worried. His story was elaborate, full of specific details. The make of the other car, the officer's name, the color of the ambulance. It sounded so real. Later, I saw a dent on his car door. See, he'd pointed, told you. Proof. The dent was small, almost imperceptible. But it was there. And it silenced the nagging doubt. Psychological deep dive number 2, gaslighting. What Mark was doing, without me even realizing it, was slowly, meticulously gaslighting me. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where a person causes someone to question their own memory, perception, or sanity. It's a gradual process. They deny things they clearly said or did, twist facts, or flat out lie, making you doubt your own observations. That never happened, you're imagining things, you're being overly sensitive. They might even provide proof, like that tiny dent, making you feel irrational for ever doubting them. The goal is to destabilize you, to make you rely solely on their version of reality, making you more susceptible to their control. And I, in my earnest desire to trust and believe, was falling right into the trap. Each denial, each twisting of facts, each elaborate excuse chipped away at my self-trust, leaving me vulnerable. And the deeper I fell, the harder it would be to climb out of the well he was digging for me. The bottom, I would soon discover, was far, far away. The last red flag, the one that truly stands out now in stark relief, was his increasing isolation of me. He started subtly criticizing Sarah, calling her negative or too cynical. He'd make comments like, "Do you really think Sarah understands our special connection, Alex? She just doesn't get it." If I mentioned meeting up with her, he'd suddenly have an emergency or demand my full attention, making me feel guilty for wanting to spend time with anyone else. My world, once wide and full of diverse connections, began to shrink, slowly orbiting only around Mark. I didn't see it as isolation then. I saw it as a sign of his deep affection, his desire to be with me, and me alone. What a fool I was. This cozy little world we built was about to ignite, and I'd be left standing in the ashes, wondering how I'd ever mistaken cinder for comfort. The catalyst wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a sudden revelation from an anonymous source. It was mundane, almost embarrassingly so, in its genesis. It was a single, overlooked receipt, tucked away in the pocket of a coat Mark had borrowed from me. We were planning a weekend getaway, another one of his grand, romantic gestures that somehow always ended with me footing the bill. "Alex, honey, my car's in the shop again," he'd sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Could we take yours? And maybe you could grab the hotel room? I'll square up for everything else, I promise." Of course, I agreed. I was already picturing the sunrise over the ocean, the quiet moments together. I went in my hall closet to retrieve my trusty old navy peacoat, the one with the deep pockets perfect for holding keys and a phone. As I pulled it off the hanger, a small slip of paper fluttered to the floor. It was a receipt, crumpled and slightly damp, from the Willow Creek Diner. Nothing unusual about that except the date. It was for last Tuesday. The same Tuesday he'd been 3 hours late for dinner, the one where he spun the elaborate tale of the fender bender, the injured driver, the police reports, the dead phone. And the time. 7:15 p.m. At the Willow Creek. He was supposed to have been on the scene of an accident, his phone supposedly dead, embroiled in a police investigation. But according to this receipt, he was having dinner at our diner alone at a booth in the back, ordering the meatloaf special. The time, the date, the place, it shredded his entire story. My heart, which moments before had been fluttering with anticipation for our getaway, seized. It felt like an ice-cold hand had reached in and squeezed hard. I picked up the receipt, my fingers trembling slightly. The ink was faded, but legible. One meatloaf special. One coffee. Signed, M. Evans. Mark's middle initial. The world seemed to tilt. The familiar comfort of my home, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the scent of the lavender sachet in the closet, it all felt alien. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't even breathe in that moment. It wasn't the lie itself that was so devastating. It was the sheer fabrication of it, the intricate details of the car accident, the injured person, the police, the dead phone. All to cover up, what? A dinner alone? Why would he lie about that? Why the elaborate theatrical performance? That little slip of paper, so unassuming, so easily dismissed, was like a pin pricking a meticulously inflated balloon. And as the air slowly, agonizingly, began to leak out, I heard not a pop, but a whisper, a terrifying whisper from a place deep inside me that had been silenced for too long. He lies about everything. It wasn't a sudden, explosive realization. It was a slow motion unraveling. The colors in the room seemed to drain, leaving everything in a stark, black and white clarity. Every skip phone call, every work emergency, every broken down car, every financial request, they all clicked into place, not as unfortunate circumstances, but as meticulously crafted deceptions. The little dent on his car door? Suddenly, it looked like something that could have been there for months, or easily inflicted. The truth, ugly and raw, was screaming at me. I gripped the receipt so tightly it crinkled further. My hands were shaking. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This wasn't just a lie, it was a betrayal of a profound nature. It wasn't just a misstep, it was an indication of a pattern, a deep-seated pathology. The man I had loved, the man I had given my heart and my finances to, was not who I thought he was. He was a ghost, a carefully constructed illusion. And with that terrifying thought, my rose-tinted glasses didn't just fall off. They shattered into a million irreparable pieces. This was it. The moment I finally stopped looking away. The moment I started looking through. And what I saw on the other side was a landscape of deceit. I knew, with chilling certainty, that the cozy little life I had built was about to be obliterated. The next few days were a blur of internal turmoil. Mark noticed nothing, or at least, he pretended not to. He was still talking about our coastal getaway, asking me to pick out restaurants. I just nodded, a hollow smile pasted on my face, the crumpled receipt a burning ember in my pocket. I couldn't just confront him. Not yet. I knew, deep down, that a direct confrontation would lead to more gaslighting, more elaborate lies, and I wasn't going to let him twist my reality anymore. I needed proof. Irrefutable, undeniable proof. My journey began with that little slip of paper. I took it to the Willow Creek Diner. Martha, bless her no-nonsense heart, was wiping down the counter. Martha, I began, trying to keep my voice even. Do you remember if Mark was in here last Tuesday evening? She paused, her rag hovering over a coffee stain. Mark? Oh, sure, hon, he was in. Sat at his usual booth by the window. Had the meatloaf. Said he was waiting for you, but you never showed. My blood ran cold. Waiting for me? Yeah. Said you had a last-minute thing. But he hung around for a while, seemed a little down. That lie, waiting for me, was a clever, cruel twist. It made it seem like I was the one who had let him down. It would have explained my absence to Martha, made me look like the flaky one. The manipulation was so deep, so layered, it made my stomach churn. My next stop was the municipal records office. I'd seen Mark's mail once, an address on Elm Street. I used my librarian privileges to look up property records. It turned out the house on Elm Street wasn't his. It was registered to an Eleanor Vance. A single woman. My mind immediately leapt to the worst conclusion. Was he living with another woman? Was he married? The thought was a visceral punch to the gut. The elegant, tasteful decor he described for his place on Elm Street, his new kitchen, the garden he was tending, all lies. I felt a surge of cold, focused anger. This wasn't just about money anymore, or even about being lied to. This was about a fundamental breach of trust, a desecration of everything I held dear. I went back to my own apartment. I needed to access his phone. I knew his passcode, a silly one, my birthday. He'd given it to me, another act of transparency that now felt like a taunt. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. What I found was a Pandora's box. Texts to Eleanor Vance, intimate, loving, full of plans for their future. Pictures of them together, on dates, at home, even on that same coastal getaway he'd promised me. There were calls, frequent and long, to other numbers I didn't recognize, some saved under generic names like client, or work project. And then, the clincher, a folder of financial documents. Bank statements. Not his, but someone else's. Several someone else's. I saw my name, my account number. A series of large, consistent withdrawals. My savings, meant for the community center, systematically drained, then transferred. Not loans, not investments. Just outright theft. And the farm initiative? It existed, yes, but he wasn't an investor. He was a minor consultant, paid a meager wage, and he'd been telling them I was his primary investor, the one fronting the money. Psychological deep dive number 3, The sunk cost fallacy. As I sat there, staring at the evidence, a terrible realization dawned on me about my own complicity. I had invested so much in Mark, emotionally, financially, temporally. I had poured my hope, my dreams, my very self into this relationship. And this, readers, is the perfect example of the sunk cost fallacy. It's a cognitive bias where people continue to invest in something that is clearly failing because they've already invested so much in it and they don't want to waste that initial investment. The more time, effort, or money you put into something, the harder it becomes to walk away, even when it's actively harming you. You tell yourself, but I've already come this far, or it's got to get better. I've sacrificed too much for it to fail. It's the desperate hope that if you just hold on a little longer, it will turn around. This fallacy kept me in denial, kept me rationalizing, kept me blind, because the alternative, admitting it was all a lie, admitting I had been foolish, felt too painful to contemplate. It meant admitting I had wasted a piece of my life. The phone logs revealed more than just Eleanor. There were other names, other women, in other towns. Each conversation a careful calibration of charm and manipulation. He had entire scripts, I realized, for different scenarios. The sick aunt story, the car trouble story, the urgent client meeting story. He recycled them like an actor performing for different audiences. He was a master illusionist, and I was just one of his many marks. I called Sarah. My voice was hoarse, choked with tears and fury. He's not who I thought he was, Sarah. He's a con artist. A thief. He's been lying about everything. She was at my door in 15 minutes, her face etched with concern. I laid out all the evidence, the receipt, the property records, the phone contents, the bank statements. She listened, her hand occasionally squeezing my arm. When I finished, she just shook her head, tears welling in her own eyes. Oh, Alex. I knew something was off, but this is beyond anything I imagined. Her belief in me, her quiet validation, was like a lifeline in a turbulent sea. I went to the bank the next morning. The branch manager, a kindly woman named Mrs. Peterson, listened patiently as I explained the situation. She confirmed the transfers. Ms. Vance, she said gently, it appears funds have been transferred from your savings account to an account held by Mr. Mark Davies. Davies. Not Davis, as he'd always spelled it to me. Another lie, a simple yet effective way to muddy the waters. And to several other accounts. Some are personal, some are business accounts associated with various shell corporations. It's quite extensive. The word extensive hung in the air, heavy with the weight of my lost dreams. My community center savings. Gone. Psychological deep dive number 4, traumatic bonding. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal, the intricate web of lies, should have been an instant severing. But even then, amidst the anger and the pain, there was a flicker of something insidious, a yearning for the Mark I thought I knew. This is the hallmark of traumatic bonding. It's a psychological attachment that forms in situations where there's an intermittent cycle of abuse, manipulation, and then affection or validation. The love bombing and periods of apparent genuine connection create a powerful bond. When the abuse or manipulation occurs, the victim is often left confused and hurt, but when the abuser returns with remorse, promises, or even just a moment of kindness, the victim's hope is rekindled. The brain starts to associate the abuser with the resolution of the pain they caused, rather than the cause itself. It creates a powerful, almost addictive cycle of seeking validation from the very source of your suffering. It's why victims often stay or even return to abusive relationships. A part of me, the old, trusting, giving Alex, still wanted to believe the real Mark was just trapped, misguided, not truly evil. It was a terrifying pull, even as the logical part of my brain screamed bloody murder. It took every ounce of strength to recognize that pull for what it was, a dangerous illusion. I called the police. Officer Miller, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, took my statement. I handed her the printouts, the receipt, the photos. She nodded grimly as I recounted Mark's elaborate stories, his promises, his constant financial requests. Ms. Vance, she said, her voice firm, this isn't just about a broken heart. This is a clear case of fraud and potentially grand larceny. We'll open an investigation immediately. The investigation was swift, aided by the sheer volume of evidence I had painstakingly collected. They tracked Mark Davies through his various aliases and bank accounts. He wasn't just fleecing me, he had a network of victims across several states, all of them lonely, trusting women, often professionals, with savings accounts he could target. He used the same playbook. The same charming persona, the same sick relative or business opportunity stories. Eleanor Vance, it turned out, was another victim, although she was further along in the relationship and had even more to lose. When the police contacted her, she was devastated. She had been planning a wedding with him. A wedding. My situation suddenly felt less uniquely devastating and more like a cog in a vast, cruel machine. This wasn't personal. It was a business. His business. And the sheer audacity, the cold-blooded calculation of it all, was a different kind of pain. It wasn't the pain of a broken heart. It was the pain of utter, fundamental dehumanization. He hadn't seen me as a person. He'd seen me as a mark, a bank account with a face. And the face of that man, the one I had loved, was now dissolving into a composite of malice and deception. The arrest of Mark Davies, whose real name turned out to be Michael Jenkins, was swift. He was apprehended in a small town 2 states over, attempting to love bomb another unsuspecting woman. The news, when it reached Greenwood, was a shockwave. My quiet, idyllic town was suddenly buzzing with gossip, whispers, and concerned glances. Some people offered sympathy. Others, I could tell, were wondering what I had done to deserve it or how I could have been so foolish. That particular sting, the judgment in some eyes, was almost as bad as the initial betrayal. The legal process was grueling. Testifying, reliving the lies, facing Michael in court, he tried to maintain his charming facade even then, giving me small, reassuring smiles that made my stomach clench. He pleaded not guilty, of course, spinning tales of misunderstanding, of being misguided by financial difficulties, of being deeply in love with me and Eleanor, and just confused. It was a final, desperate act of gaslighting, trying to destabilize the narrative even in a courtroom. But the evidence was overwhelming, thanks to my initial investigation and the subsequent police work. The numerous victims, Eleanor included, stood united. Psychological Deep Dive Number 5, Dark Triad Personality Traits. Michael Jenkins, or Mark Davies, exhibited classic dark triad personality traits. This psychological concept refers to a cluster of 3 personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. 1. Narcissism, characterized by grandiosity, entitlement, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. Michael craved attention and adoration, believing he was superior and entitled to what others had. His elaborate lies were a testament to his inflated self-importance. 2. Machiavellianism involves manipulation, exploitation of others, a cynical disregard for morality, and a focus on self-interest and deception. Michael's calculated use of different personas, his intricate deceptions, and his cold-blooded approach to fleecing multiple victims perfectly illustrate this. He saw people as pawns in his game. 3. Psychopathy, marked by a lack of empathy, impulsivity, superficial charm, and antisocial behavior. While he wasn't physically violent, his emotional and financial violence was immense. His ability to lie without remorse, his superficial charm, and his utter disregard for the devastation he caused are hallmarks of psychopathic tendencies. Understanding these traits didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped me frame it. He wasn't just a flawed person who made bad choices. He was operating from a deeply ingrained, destructive personality structure. He wasn't going to change. This knowledge, stark and unyielding, was the final nail in the coffin of my naive hope. The verdict came down. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud and grand larceny. He received a significant prison sentence. The sense of relief was profound, but it wasn't the cathartic triumph I'd imagined. It was a quiet, weary exhale. My savings, sadly, were mostly unrecoverable. He'd spent it all, living a lavish, false life. The dream of the community center, for now, had to be shelved. That was a bitter pill to swallow, a tangible loss that represented so much more than just money. The emotional fallout was immense. For months, I felt raw, vulnerable. I questioned every decision I had ever made, every interaction, every trust one had placed. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, replaying conversations, dissecting his every word, searching for the clue I'd missed. The trust one had so freely given, not just to Mark, but to the very concept of human goodness, was shattered. I withdrew, finding solace only in the quiet sanctuary of the library, the predictable comfort of books. Sarah was my rock, listening without judgment, reminding me that it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't been foolish, but targeted. She'd bring over homemade casseroles, force me to go for walks, slowly, gently, nudging me back towards the world. I started therapy. It was hard, painful work, excavating the roots of my own predisposition to trust, to give without boundaries. We talked about my upbringing, my parents' well-meaning, but ultimately ill-equipped advice on human nature. We explored why I felt the need to be the fixer, the rescuer. And slowly, painstakingly, I began to reconstruct my sense of self, not as the naive, easily exploited Alex, but as a stronger, wiser woman. One of the hardest lessons was forgiveness. Not for Michael, he would earn his consequences. But for myself. For the mistakes I made, for the time I lost, for the dream I deferred. It was a slow process, learning to shed the shame and guilt, understanding that being targeted by a predator is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of theirs. Psychological. Deep dive number 6. Cognitive dissonance and reevaluation. The period after the discovery and before accepting the full truth was a battle against cognitive dissonance. This is the mental discomfort experienced by a person who holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values, or who performs an action that is contradictory to one of their beliefs. For me, it was the clash between Mark is a loving, good person and Mark is a manipulative con artist who stole from me. My brain desperately tried to reconcile these conflicting realities, often by trying to find excuses for him or blaming myself. The breakthrough came when I consciously chose to embrace the painful truth, to allow the dissonance to be resolved by discarding the false belief. This reevaluation was crucial for my healing. It meant accepting that the Mark I loved never existed, that he was always just a sophisticated projection. Only then could I start rebuilding on a foundation of reality, not fantasy. Life in Greenwood slowly returned to a new normal. The whispers died down. My colleagues at the library were incredibly supportive, offering a haven of familiar routine. I started volunteering again, but this time with clear boundaries. I still helped people, but I no longer sacrificed my own well-being or resources without careful consideration. The generosity remained, but the naivety was gone. My community center dream? It's not gone, just postponed. I've started saving again, slowly. This time, with a fiercer protection over my resources and a healthier understanding of who deserves my trust. I've learned to say no. I've learned to spot the red flags, not to dismiss them. I've learned that while it's good to see the best in people, it's vital to also see them as they are, not just as you wish them to be. The scars are there, of course. A lingering wariness, a hesitation before I fully open up. But they're not debilitating. They're reminders. Reminders of how far I've come. Reminders of the strength I found within myself when everything I believed in was crumbling. I gave everything to people who gave me nothing. I kept hoping they'd change someday, but they never did. So I finally changed instead. I changed from someone who let others define her worth to someone who built her own. And that, I realized, was worth more than all the money in the world. It was my true, undeniable victory.